Hi, my name is Jay Jarris. I'm a senior loss control consultant with Gallagher Bassett. I have over 25 years of experience, working as a safety professional. My background generally is I worked in the petrochemical industry for over 10 years. I worked in nuclear facilities for over 10 years, and now been working at Gallagher Bassett for roughly 7 years now. Well, we do a lot of work within the food industry. As you can imagine, there's grain, there is flour, there's other materials that get mixed in that are powders that get brought into these industries. And these industries, spread, it develops powder. But we also do other work for other industries. We do, aluminum facilities, we do woodworking facilities, and most recently, we just did one for a facility that repurposes wires. So they're stripping down the wires, the materials, plastics are coming off, and as a result of that, they develop a lot of dust. And we go out there and we help them figure out ways to control the dust and make sure that they're doing the job in the most safe way. And one thing that really gets me about these dust working in that is there's still explosions, there's still fires, there's still fatalities that go on in this industry. Most recently, there was one that just happened in Nebraska where a father and his two young daughters were killed at a grain facility. The daughters are waiting for their father to get off work. They're just waiting in his office. And as a result of, a few different scenarios, the facility blew up and, these three were lost. And you still hear about this. Most people think dust explosions. They think stuff that maybe happened in the 1800s or early 1900s, but you know, in the early 2000s, there's the Imperial Sugar facility that blew up that killed 14 people. Every year there are facilities, like several of them, that blow up because of dust, and there's so much unknowns that for facility operators that they don't know, that they don't understand what they should be doing to mitigate this. And I believe that I could actually help people, you know, doing this process could actually help save lives. A dust hazard analysis is an in-depth look at your facility and how you are managing your dust. So, for example, do you have a housekeeping program? Are you following the NFPA 660, requirements for dust? OSHA has cited several facilities over the years for endangering workers because they haven't been following these processes, these procedures. Well, now is always a good time. If your company has not had a DHA done, which stands for dust hazard analysis, I mean, do you have a program for housekeeping? Do you have dust collectors at your facility? Are the dust collectors designed so if there's a fire within them or a small explosion, it's not going to propagate through the entire facility? It's not going to propagate through the dust collectors and cause other explosions, because oftentimes it's not the initial explosion that's the worst. It's the secondary explosions. So, say for example, you have don't have a very good housekeeping program. You're not managing your dust the way it should be handled. You may have accumulations up on the rafters, um, within ceiling tiles, within things like that, where you have a small explosion knocks that dust up in the air, and boom! As a result of that small explosion, I have a bigger explosion that this occurs because all that dust just exploded in a confined space and blew the roof off and blew up areas, and people have gotten injured or killed in those situations. Generally, is your dust combustible? I mean, that's a great question everybody asks. Like, how do you even know if my dust is combustible? Well, there's tests that could be run from it. So these tests are going to tell us, you know, what's the ignition temperature? How explosive is the dust? Um, and generally, if your dust is carbon based, it's going to be combustible. And several metals are also combustible. Think about aluminum, titanium, things like that are all could be combustible dust in the dust form. So we'll look at that. We'll make recommendations for testing. We're going to make recommendations on how to improve your housekeeping, how to, maybe modify any dust collection systems, where these dust collection systems are set up. So if there is an explosion, if there is anything that occurs it's going to not injure people, or there won't be people working in those areas where this could occur. So we're going to try to make these recommendations, look at your facility, and help you design the best process to make the job as safe as possible for everyone working there. Well, the big one is NFPA 660. NFPA 660 just combined. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. They put out codes. And prior to NFPA 660, which just came out a couple years ago, there was about 10 different dust standards in the NFPA world that all got brought together under NFPA 660. So it's the latest and greatest out there. It consolidates a lot of the confusion. It makes everything a little bit easier to follow in that situation. OSHA, it's a consensus standard as well for OSHA. So OSHA will look at these standards and say, okay, this facility has a dust problem. What is a consensus standard? So a consensus standard generally is, what is the rest of the industry doing to make sure that employees, that workers aren't going to get injured, that they're going to come to work and leave in the same way that they showed up. So we want to make sure that, so they're going to say, okay, we don't have an OSHA standard on that, but there's a consensus standard. NFPA 660 is a consensus standard. And as you could also imagine, there's insurance companies, because if there's an explosion, if there's something happens, who pays for it? The insurance companies. So many insurers now are requiring companies to get a DHA performed, so they can make sure that their facility is operating in a way that's going to minimize that from dust explosions actually occurring at their facility. Because they don't know about them. I mean, we see dust. We don't think that, oh, this could be explosive. This could be something that could cause a big explosion throughout the facility. So let's just think about flour. What do we have in flour? We use it in baking, we use it in our homes, use it everywhere. But in large volumes in a facility, that flour, in the right circumstances, goes up in the air, propagates. There's a ignition source in that situation. It could actually cause an explosion, a large fire. In that, you could look online, look at the Imperial sugar explosion, and you will see just sugar, something we all use. We eat it, probably too much of it, honestly, but we use it, we eat it, it's around us everywhere. We don't think of this as being something that could be explosive, but in the right circumstances, it is. And 20 years ago, it killed 14 people. The potential consequences of not performing a DHA, I mean, obviously the biggest one is your facility in the right circumstances could blow up. You could have a fire, an explosion. As a result of that, you could have seriously injured, employees who get seriously injured or killed, and even maybe some of the facilities around you, your neighbors, other industrial facilities in the area. All that could occur. Another thing is your insurance rates may go up. Your insurer may require you to have a DHA. So they're going to come in and make those requirements. And if you don't do that, they may drop you, or they may increase your rates for that process. And thirdly is, OSHA may come in, and if you have a situation out there where they see a lot of dust, they understand that you should have a DHA. It's the, what the industry is doing, and you don't have it, they could potentially cite you as well. The most common issue that I would see with most existing DHAs is they don't have the right person doing them. So some companies might just have their maintenance folks, oh, Phil, just do this dust hazard analysis, walk around. So they're walking around the facility, and they're putting out their best effort without question, but they're not trained on it. They may not understand, the full details of what they're looking at, and you know, and as a result, some stuff may get missed. Where they bring in somebody like myself or others in my team, that we've been doing these for years. We have experience doing them. We've seen been to different facilities. We've seen what works, what doesn't work. Um, and we're not always going to put out and make a recommendation for a $1 million fix when $100 fix could be the right answer. So by using us, by going through us, we kind of have that knowledge, that background, and that understanding. The most common issue that I would see with most existing DHAs is they don't have the right person doing them. So some companies might just have their maintenance folks, oh, Phil, just do this dust hazard analysis, walk around. So they're walking around the facility and they're putting out their best effort without question, but they're not trained on it. They don't may not understand the full details of what they're looking at, and you know and as a result, some stuff may get missed. Where they bring in somebody like myself or others from my team that we've been doing these for years. We have experience doing them. We've seen different type, been to different facilities. We've seen what works, what doesn't work, and we're not always going to put out and make a recommendation for a $1 million fix when $100 fix could be the right answer. So by using us, by going through us, we kind of have that knowledge, that background, and that understanding. Well, probably one of the biggest reasons that some DHAs fail is that companies do not implement the recommendations from those DHAs. So if a DHA makes recommendations to put some isolation valves in the dust collection system, and the company decides not to do that for whatever reason, you may have dust or anything else that propagates through the system. If a spark occurs in that, it can have an explosion in that situation. Or sometimes, say for example, housekeeping. If a company doesn't put it into the PM programs, or the PM program isn't really as robust as it should be, isn't being filed the way it should be, things get missed. So, we see what we see. So let's say, for example, I see dust on the floor. And most employees will sweep that up. They see dust on a machine, they may sweep that up. But many of them are not looking up in the rafters. They're not seeing the dust built up on that in those situations. So not understanding it, not seeing it, and not having the proper PM program in place, could result in not actually, following what the recommendations are in the DHA and mitigating the circumstances. Well, poor follow through is the obvious one. You know, any consultant, most consultants go out there, they put their best foot forward. Now they're going to make recommendations, they're going to identify concerns, they're going to identify issues. And it's up to the company to actually implement those recommendations that are put in place. When recommendations are put in place by companies, they should actually rate them. So you have, this is the most important down to, yes, these are things you maybe should do within the next year or 2 years to make things even safer. But by rating them, the company could prioritize its money, prioritize its resources, and do a focus on, the most dangerous parts of, what was identified during the DHA, and work its way down from there. Well, the first question a company should be asking is, what's the most important thing I should be doing in this DHA? Where do I start? So you get, some of these DHAs sometimes could have, 30 or 40 recommendations. And any good DHA is going to rate those recommendations on, what is the most dangerous versus, doing a risk analysis on them. So they should look at that and start at the very top. Hey, what could we do to fix the worst of the worst, and work your way down from there? The second thing they could ask themselves is, many companies will ask is, what is this going to cost us? How can we budget this? What do we put into the budgets? Because let's face it, companies are in business to make money. And when it comes to safety, everybody wants to be safe. There's no question about it. But we also understand that, sometimes a $50,000 fix, could be fixed with a $1,000 tool instead. So we want to make sure that the recommendations that we're putting in place and the companies that they have, that they're making the best decisions for themselves. But when they're reading these reviews, when they're reading the DHAs, if there's something they don't agree with, reach out to the consultant. That's important. Understand why the consultant put this information into the DHA. Don't just say, oh, well, that's expensive. We can't do that. Okay, why did the person put it in there? Is there anything else that could be done to make to fix the situation? Maybe a little bit cheaper, maybe a little bit more research, maybe a better understanding, or there's always more than one way to skin a cat. So we want to make sure that we're doing the job as safe as possible, but we also want we're understanding to stuff does cost a lot of money at times, and is there ways that we could get the same result at a better cost, better price? Once a DHA is completed, generally it should be reviewed with the client by the consultant. They should go over the DHA. Have a meeting about it. Get all stakeholders involved. Let's go through the process. That gives the client an opportunity to ask questions, gives the consultant an opportunity to explain why they put, recommendations where they put them, and to explain to the client maybe in a way that they may not totally understand, how it's written in the report, but better understand, why it's there. They can give examples. They could talk about their mindset. Somebody like me or some other consultants, we've seen several of these facilities. We've seen a bunch of things. We could identify best practices. We could see where there's issues, that are sometimes across the board. And by asking us these questions, hey, what do you see? What's our best practices elsewhere? What could we do? And how could we do this in a way that is, gets done in a quick, effective manner and makes it safe for everybody out there? Probably the most effective engineering control or control they could put in place would be housekeeping. I mean, keeping up with your housekeeping, understanding where the dust is being built up, looking at your rafters, looking in your ceiling tiles, understanding, if, have a routine process. How often do we clean? And then also looking at the machines. When are there, keeping up with the maintenance of them? Are there bearings that have a life of maybe a year? How often do you change them? How often do they check them? How often are they greased? How often is equipment fixed and maintained and inspected? Keeping up with that are all simple things that many companies could do. Oftentimes people think, oh, DHA is going to cost me a fortune. Sometimes it's just putting in the practices that you already have in place, or maybe just modifying them a little bit, that could make up 80% of the fixes that you need. If you have a facility where OSHA is aware of it, um, OSHA has a national emphasis program, and that national emphasis program does have dust hazard analysis on it. So OSHA is looking at facilities that they know are a dust hazard, that actually could have built up dust, that have potential to have fires, explosions, things like that. And their national emphasis program is going to be having their inspectors look at those facilities. And those inspectors are going to be asking the questions: how are you keeping your employees safe? Are you following this consensus standards? Have you had any fires? Have you had any injuries as a result of dust? What have you done about it? How's your housekeeping program? So they're going to make recommendations like that, and worst case, they're going to fine, or the companies that may not be in compliance with it. Well, dust hazard analysis document would actually demonstrate due diligence. Um, Having a housekeeping program in place that addresses the various aspects of dust, not just saying, no, we're going to keep the area clean, but understanding, hey, we're not going to have dust over 1/32 of an inch. I mean, that's a thickness of a paperclip. So many people say, oh, I don't have dust. I don't have dust. I walked into one facility one time, and I was there for a whole different reason. And I walked into one room, and they had probably about 8 inches of dust on the floor. That was, from it was a flour dust on the floor. And as a safety professional, I can't really ignore that. I can't, even though I wasn't there for dust hazard analysis, I was there for another reason. I can't go into them and just say, "Oh, I'm not here for this. I'm gonna ignore it." I had to bring it up to them and say, "Listen, you guys have a seriously problem here. If you have an explosion, anything like that knocks this dust up in the air, this is gonna get really ugly really fast for you." So I made some strong recommendations that they get a dust hazard analysis performed, that they immediately clean up those areas, that they follow NFPA. At the time it was 652, but now it's 660. That they follow those criteria that's in those documents to take care of this situation for them. Leadership involvement with dust hazard risk. Every company has leaders up on top. You got your down from the president all the way, to the workers on the line. Understanding that what your facility does and the risk in them. So it's not just we think safety, but it's not always just safety. It's general safety. I mean, there's dust hazards, there's environmental hazards, and how your company addresses that. So having the managers, line managers, and even employees understand what they're working with, what they're dealing with, allowing them to bring up concerns, you know, to management and have those current concerns get addressed, and actually having them being part of if a DHA is being performed at a facility, getting them involved in it. Because many of these people are experts at what they do. We might think, oh, it's just a person who works the line at the factory. Well, this person sees things every day that many people don't see. They understand where maybe the leaks are, where when they have to stop the machine. They understand maybe there's a small fire that happens once in a while that doesn't get reported for some reason. There's many things that these folks understand. Oftentimes when we do DHAs, we bring in the maintenance people to walk around the facility with us, because they will point out things that we didn't realize, or maybe we're going to point out things to them that they need to realize. Bonding, grounding, making sure that we don't have any, electrical discharges, making sure that we're setting up the machines, that the electrical systems are properly rated in those areas for that. So by having maintenance people who understand what you're talking about is essential, and having management who knows how to bring those people in and bring you the right people and be able to listen to those people is also essential to making sure that you don't have such explosions or dust situations that go uncontrolled. Well, Gallagher Bassett, we always say we're your trusted advisor. You come to us, you reach out to us, we're always going to be here. We're a large company. Um, Oftentimes, many of our clients, they work with different parts of Gallagher as well. So we are here for you. We give you a DHA. A year later, you have a question on that DHA, you reach out to us. We have a team of people you could work with. We have people who could answer your questions. We could look at different parts of it. Every few years, we could come back. We could help you, make sure that the processes and recommendations and what has been put in place is being done. So DHA should be, looked at about every 3 years. So if a DHA was done in 2023, you should probably be doing another DHA or doing a review of that DHA in 2026, just to make sure that your PM programs are still as strong as they've ever been. That maybe they added some new machines or some new equipment or relocated some processes. Many times things like dust analysis or other parts of safety sometimes get overlooked and sometimes get forgotten about, or even environmental as well. And we want to make sure that when you're doing that, that we're helping you through the process so you don't get, any injuries, any fatalities, or any regulatory pushback, from OSHA or any other regulatory agencies. When you're ready for your dust hazard analysis, reach out to Gallagher Bassett. We have experts on our staff who could assist you through the process. We're not here to, sell you a new dust collection system. We're not here to overcharge you for dust testing when we could look at published data. We're here to make sure that you get a proper and strong dust hazard analysis that's will meet industry standards and will make you a better company.